To build upon the last video, I'm going to walk you through exporting your textures from Substance Painter and then importing them into Marmoset here. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is let's go inside of Marmoset and go to File, Import Model, and then so I don't have Lee Chung's FBX file that he used for Substance Painter, so I just exported it from ZBrush. I think most of it is kind of the same except for the base, but that's okay. We'll just use this, and then it'll take a while because it's pretty high poly. I forgot how many verts there were, but all right. So you'll notice something right away that's a little bit different is like the viewport quality right now is actually lower than in the last video. This is also a more decimated mesh, just to keep this file a little bit lighter. And if you look at the top left, there is this rocket icon, and that rocket icon is green. So that's the speedy viewports. I didn't go over that last time, but to kind of save you some time and not have to deal with turning things on and off in your render settings here, so I could take this back to 2. I could turn make sure the GI is enabled, AO is enabled. I can do the shadow quality high or ludicrous, and maybe occlusion detail 2x. You can see that nothing's really changing just because this speedy viewport is on. If I turn that off, see it takes a while, and then the shadow quality increases, and I'm trying to rotate, and it's really slow, right? So I can hit that button again, and it's on. Or the keyboard shortcut for that is Control-Shift-J. Now, let's place this a little bit more accurately. I'm going to minimize that. So let's minimize this head here. And if I click on that group, that model group that I imported, and I hit Control-F to figure out where that is. Okay, so it's all the way here and all the way to the side. So I'm not entirely sure why your pivot is way off like that. I don't know if maybe you moved it by accident. I could either just drag this over like this, or we could manually input some values here like -1300. Maybe I can take this, raise it up, and then I'll pull this back so that we're kind of like lining up again. So I'm using this base head as a reference to place this. And since this model is about 6 feet tall as far in terms of centimeters, then the lighting setup actually works really well. So I don't need to worry about like the dark or these distant lighting models here. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the face. And then here, let's go ahead. So you'll notice that when you bring in a model file like this, it makes a material for you, and that material is named the same thing as the body, or not the body, the geometry, right? So like, for instance, there is a armor that doesn't UV here. There is also armor that won't UV. I started making a bunch of presets for you all, but I found that it's just easier to plug your textures directly into here, so you don't have to manually assign anything. You will have to change the material type from spec gloss to metal roughness, but that's like not a big deal. The only material that I think you actually need, or that would be easier for you to use, is the skin material that I made. So that's going to be the preset skin, and we'll go into that in just a second here. So if I hop over to Substance Painter, this is his file, and let's see, if I go to File and I do Export Textures, so just like in class, I'm just going to use the PBR metal roughness, and I actually don't think we need to do anything extra here. I don't think it's worth it for you to export a scattering map, because that thickness map or that scattering map is not... you can get around that in Marmosets and just make your life easier, so you don't have to go with that configuration. If you really want to, check the video that I made in class on how to get this exported correctly, but I'm just gonna leave it at PBR metal roughness. And I don't think you have an emissive channel, but we'll export anyway. And so this is quite a few maps here, right? I'm gonna go ahead and point this to where I need to export here, and maybe I will just make a new folder. We'll call this textures 2 for the second time we export. And I'm gonna change this from PNG to a Targa just because I prefer not to use PNGs. Where's Targa? There we go, Targa. And then hit exports, and this should actually export fairly quickly. So even though we have, I don't know, like 15 textures to deal with, the actual export time is really fast. And now if I go back into Marmoset, it's going to be fairly straightforward, right? So I'll just go select the body material here. Basically anything that doesn't have a preset prefix is probably your material that you brought in. And if we look here, the surface, that's going to be your normal map. So I can plug in, say, the normal map. The microsurface is going to be your roughness, and I'll right away change that to roughness. And then we would do the albedo, which is actually the base color, at least that's what it's called in Substance. And then the reflectivity, that's going to be your metalness channel. Chances are, if you didn't have to, let me set this to metalness here. You probably don't even need to do this. You could, because most of your metalness maps are black, unless it's actually the metal bits, because you separate out your material, you could just X this out and just rely on turning the slider up and down. So that's one less thing for you to click on in imports, right? So I'll do a few more just so you get that process under control, right? So let's do armor that won't UV. Hop on over to the surface, click on the little icon here, and then we'll do, I do recommend setting this to a detail view and not a thumbnail because it's just way faster to read. So I can plug in the normal map. Gloss is going to be roughness. Change that from gloss to roughness so that this actually reads correctly. And then reflectivity is going to be metallic. And then that's going to be metalness. Right. And one more. And then we will just pop open, or I'm going to address the skin issue here. So for the arms, again, normal map. If your normal map, for whatever reason, looks kind of weird, you'll have to flip the Y channel. Or let's go back here. Like if it's not lighting correctly, then you have to do this. It's actually kind of hard to tell. Do we need to flip it? I'll leave it alone and we can address that next. Arms, I won't do roughness. Switch that from gloss to roughness, albedo, plug in the albedo, plug in the base color, and then reflectivity is going to be metallic, and then change that from specular to metalness. So that's going to be tedious for me to go through all 15 texture sets like that, but that's that process. So one thing though is I do have a preset cornea shader here. So for those of you who have the double eye, where you have the cornea and then you have the eyeball, this is going to go on that outer layer. So you get that reflection, and then the eye itself is going to be inside of where the iris and the pupil are. So let's just go, I'm going to try to just reuse the default material that came with yours. And really we'll just change the albedo like that, and then well, I'll just plug everything in and see what happens. Roughness and then normal, because I don't think you actually have any normal information, but I mean you have the map, so might as well use it. Oops. Yeah, it's easy to mess up and plug weird things in the wrong channel. And I'll switch this again to metalness, switch this to roughness. One thing I did change on yours is I felt like your character, I added an emissive channel. So if under the emissive tab here, so a lot of these are grayed out because you need to add it manually. So I'll click on the drop down next to emissive, I'll check that, and I'll plug in the emissive map that it made earlier. So that's going to be eyes emissive. So Marmoset also reads PSDs. So if I go back to Photoshop, that's, where is that? So that I basically took your eye base color map from Substance and I painted everything else around the iris black so that this is gonna glow. And then I can control the glow amount by the intensity here. You could also tint this like a different color if you need to. Probably not a good idea, but we'll just leave it like that. And there we go. So if I turn that on and off, you'll see there's a distinct difference. So next, let's use the preset skin I made for you. And we'll plug in your skin. So skin normal, skin roughness, skin base color, and then metalness is skin metallic, and we'll change this. Okay, so that is metalness. Let's change this to roughness, and you'll notice that nothing has changed. That's because this is my material and not the material that came with your model. So I'll just click and drag this. And there we go. So now we have something started. My subsurface is set too high because I think my head was bigger. So if I change that, I can take this subsurface scattering value down. You could plug your thickness or scattering map from Substance if you exported it into here, but I'm just gonna do it like a global value. And then the translucency is how far does it penetrate and how much scattering. So fuzz is like a peach fuzz, so it's a slight Fresnel effect. You don't want to go too high. Do something like that. I can change the color of the basically the interior blood scattering look. So maybe I want this a little bit more red. So these are pretty subtle changes, but they do add a lot. Shift that a little bit more red. This one could be more purple maybe. Something like that. And then we can bring this translucency down and maybe not scatter or penetrate too far. Because the higher this goes up, the more it looks like wax. Does this look correct? You know, that's debatable. Maybe I'll keep it warmer. Okay, something like that. I could also darken the skin color too. For instance, I'm going to back up just a little bit here, and you'll notice that if you use these default materials that came on Marmoset, right? So on say a preset like the one I gave you, like the eye, if you look at the albedo, there is a white color swatch. And then if you look on anything that was default, that color swatch is gray. I don't know why it does that, but having it gray like that is going to darken your texture. And so I'm going to make sure that it doesn't darken anything by changing that to white. change that to white, and then we'll change this to white as well. I can play with the roughness values a little bit to get it to look a little bit more like I expect it to. And then the hair. Okay, so the last custom material, let's just plug your hair in here. The hair material I made, unfortunately doesn't work without a little bit more work. So let's just try and do this the easy way. So again, I'm gonna plug in your hair normal. So you see what that gives us. I need to make sure if it's like in the right direction. This looks a little bit weird, so I'm gonna maybe flip that Y. Trying to see what looks more correct. Okay, I think that actually looks more correct. And then we'll plug the hair roughness. But so if I flip it Y on one, chances are that means everything else needs to be flipped, right? So going through all your materials and making sure your Y channel so that the height is going in a proper direction. We'll do roughness, and then the albedo, of course, is going to be the hair base color. So that's darkening it, of course, so we can go up so it doesn't darken that. The reflectivity, we'll do hair metallic, and then metalness here. Oh, why is this advanced micro? There we go. Roughness like this. Sometimes, so you'll notice that there are a few differences in how the shaders work, right? So it might be more glossy or less glossy in Marmoset than what you might expect. You might have to like invert the roughness values and it just changes, lower it, or just let's see here. Now you could adjust these values inside of Substance, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to invert it and lower it, and this will be my way of okay, so I'll take the flip Y off. So I think it works a little bit better with this. Like this. To kind of help it look better though, I'm going to turn on the subsurface scattering. So that's going to be under the diffusion, changes from Lambertian to subsurface scattering. We can increase the overall scattering amount so that it softens the appearance of the hair. And then I'll increase the fuzz, not too high. And I'll just give it a slight rim light. Here's tricky to get it to work, to get it to look naturally without doing a lot of work, but I think this gets you pretty far. Okay, there we go, something like that. And I mean, that's more or less it. It's just you have to drag those other textures into the appropriate material here, so I can save this. And call it intro. And then I'm going to switch to the file I made and talk about some of the changes I did. So we'll go back into here and yeah, okay. So this is your file with all of the textures assigned. I'm going to switch the camera back to the main view so you can see what happened here. Don't mind my cat. think, let me go back one version of this file. So this is the dark one, right? Like I mentioned in Discord, I think you gave me the wrong file because this base is wrong. So nothing's actually working with it quite right. We can go here. I will also upload this file if you wanted to take a look at how some of these materials are set up, but basically it's what I just outlined in the beginning half of this video. In some cases, the roughness was like too shiny or something like that, so I would just invert it and play with the roughness slider here. This is a very unscientific process, but since I'm trying to get this, introduce this in the fastest way possible, I'm going to make some shortcuts for you. I think the last thing I did was we can take a look at what the different camera views are from far away. I could, if you want to do like a lineup, right, you would just select the model group, duplicate it. This will be really slow though, because your file is like really really big, or you have a lot of polys here. So you could duplicate and rotate and move this around and do like a lineup, or you can just rotate this one, take some screenshots, or take some renders and composite them together. It's hard for me to make a lighting template that will accommodate all of your different needs, but the one I chose, because it was originally just to do like a clay render, I have a pretty dark environment map, and the environment map is really important for metals because you need that reflection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the skylight. In the skylights, you can change this background to like a preset that comes with Marmoset here, and I think the one I used was the cathedral, because the cathedral gave me a lot of interesting color variation inside the metal, so it didn't look so dead and dark. But you'll see what the different results are. If you end up liking one of these other ones, that's fine, but you might have to rotate this environment map to make it work with the lighting. So that's, shift, right click and drag. We'll undo that, and then you can change the rotation here as well. But to kind of keep parity with what I showed on Discord, I'm going to change this to the cathedral like that. I ended up duplicating the head camera, just because this head camera, I set it to a 50mm lens, which is a very telephoto, and it's not quite so dynamic for the full body. So I duplicated that. I went to camera head copy, and then I increased that to, or decrease that to like 30. You could probably even do like a 20 for like a really dynamic. So when I zoom in, we get that forced perspective. That may not be so flattering on the head, but play with this. I'll do probably 25. Play with, do you look up? Or are you looking down? Are you looking up? From which angle? These are important things to figure out. Honestly, this process usually takes me more than a day, kind of fiddling with the lighting and the overall setup to get things to look right. So take your time. If you don't have time, just kind of use the template and get something as decent as you can given the time frame here. One last thing is making sure that everything's in view, right? So middle mouse clicking to try and to focus the camera. So usually focusing on the face, making sure you're, far blur. Maybe at this point I need to turn off the speedy viewport because it's not going to give me these post effects. So I'll hit Control Shift J. Like that, and then now I can see, so I can like middle mouse click on the eye, and then we can control that far blur. Maybe that's a little too much blur, because you don't want to obscure your design to the point where you can't tell that that's a weapon. So I'll take that a little bit more in view here. The sharpening post effect might actually harm you more than it does good, because when you render this image and you have like a depth of field blur and then you sharpen it, you get like some jagged edges. So I would probably take this down, take that sharpen value down. I took the vignette down as well, because it was encroaching upon the figure. Right, so you're darkening the head when you do this. So I took that down because I can always paint that in if I needed to in Photoshop. And as far as sharpening, I can just sharpen in Photoshop to counteract any sort of blurriness here. So the good thing about this speedy viewport is I can turn it all off by Control Shift J. Or I can turn off all these fancy post effects, and then when I do like a capture image F11, it's going to render with all of those fancy effects on, even if you can't see them in the viewport. Right, so then there's that effect, and you can see this, things are blurring out nicely. So for instance, if I go to that Marmoset output and I drag this into Photoshop, maybe I can duplicate this entire thing, and we can do a sharpen. I can do an, oops, not smart sharpen. Unsharp mask. And then I can mask out anything that I don't want. Like maybe I don't want anything here to be sharpened. And if I need to do more vignettes, we could do the same thing. We can just paint. Not that this is a good example, but again, you are more than welcome to do some finishing touches inside of Photoshop. Maybe I just need to do a like levels pass to kind of brighten everything. Consider changing the exposure on the camera, right? So like exposure like 2 is going to brighten the entire image. If that's too bright, then it's fine. I can change like the fog settings, for instance. So if I do here, if I set up the lights differently, we could get a lot of casting, like kind of God rays happening. Do you need to do that? No, just to show you what you can do though. That's what that is. And I think that's about it. I mean, you can go ahead obviously and play with these lights. Maybe these lights are too much. Maybe you want less, maybe you want more. You can play with these material settings. Sometimes it helps to, like for instance, on the body here, like this fabric, I could again add, maybe I can do like a microfiber, right? So the microfiber on here, on this cloth, it just helps it come forward. So that's like that fuzz Fresnel effect that's like common on velvet, cape and hood too. it'll just soften these a lot more. So when I soften it by, again, with the diffusion, changing from limburtion to say microfiber, you can change that fuzz effect. Do you want to tint that fuzz? Like how much of a fuzz do you want? Maybe it's like a cooler crushed velvet. That kind of thing. So maybe if you're working on a stylized model too, you could just turn this microfiber setting on, so you just get this Fresnel effect on everything. Right, so thinner fabrics as well, we can do that microfiber. That kind of thing. I also recommend that you don't have so many programs running at once, especially with Marmoset. When you turn on a lot of these settings, it's going to be really intense. So once you get your textures exported, just close out of Substance Painter. But I'm actually going to close out of Marmoset. And then a quick critique for your model is, I think this highlighting is probably a little too intense, right? So it looks like it's painted on, and that's usually not a great sign. So sometimes it's just taking this highlight pass and then doing a filter, and then this filter I can blur this and something like that, just so it's a little bit softer. I would consider this, I like the thickness and the framing of this pattern, but it feels unresolved at the end because it just runs off. You know, typically this blue would carry it along the fabric, and so it frames it a little bit cleaner. And since you have so many details like here, maybe you could take that, where is this? You can echo some of these other design things that you've already established to clean it up, and just so your eye doesn't run off the tabard here. Something like this. Oh, I don't think you have the highlighting, the basic lighting pass set up on here. So, but I do think usually this kind of lip embroidery requires an additional something, right? So I'll just do like a new fill layer right on top of everything. The fill layer will do the black mask, and then I'll do a generator, and then the mask editor. We'll do the we'll do the curvature. Turn these down. I'll paint this out later too, just so I get this top part, right? So if I do like a screen, and then we just take this down a little bit, we can colorize this to just something different. I think that's a little too different. There we go, something like this. And then in this, on top of this mask editor, I'll right click and add a paint layer, and then I can paint out this interior part, right? Hit X to turn this on, and something like that. You know, we could also at this point turn the roughness back on, So I could either make this more rough, less rough, probably more rough just so it separates it from everything below. This white noise, I feel like you could take this height, and on the height you could push it in or out. Oh, and that's not the one I'm thinking of. So wherever these dots are coming from, you can kind of push that in, and then they'll give you some detail on your norm out, and so when the light hits it, it's going to be a little less obvious. Or not less obvious, it'll just break it up. Let's see. In that, let's open up Marmoset one more time. And I'll pull up that final scene. So if this skylight is like still too dark and I'm still missing stuff here, you know, we can brighten that just a little bit. Yeah, so that you get those nicer reflections. I think that's it. I know that was a little fast, but hopefully that was clear enough for you to follow. Let me know if you have questions as usual.